compromise behind Kyiv's back undermines not only Ukraine's rights, but also the security of all Europe. Kyiv must decide for itself which alliances to join and which not to. And no decisions about Ukraine can be made without its knowledge and consent. The leaders of the European Union have stated what kind of peace plan they envision for Ukraine. After all, if the aggressor is appeased now, tomorrow any EU country could be under threat. So what exactly are the Europeans proposing, and what red lines are they drawing? Let's figure it out. So the European Parliament in Strasbourg has adopted a sweeping resolution in which it gave its assessment of the peace plan proposed by the United States. The deputy stated outright that peace cannot be built on concessions to the aggressor, that a peace agreement with Russia is only possible if Ukraine receives security guarantees equivalent to Article 5 of the NATO treaty, and that the temporarily occupied Ukrainian territories cannot, under any circumstances, be recognized as Russian. In addition, the aggressor must be held accountable for all bloody crimes and fully compensate for the damage caused.
Given that Russia has blatantly violated previous legally binding agreements, the obligation to respect the sovereignty of its neighbors and the fundamental principles of international law, any agreement on a lasting peace must precede a ceasefire and be backed by effective measures to monitor compliance and deter delays in fulfilling obligations. The agreements must be based on reliable security guarantees for Ukraine from the EU and the US. These guarantees should prevent and immediately counter any new aggression. From the resolution of the European Parliament opposition to the EU regarding the proposed peace plan and the EU's involvement in achieving a just and lasting peace for Ukraine.
Any talk of peace should not start with demands on Ukraine, but with pressure on Russia, which continues its terror and violence. Brussels emphasized that the first step should be an immediate and unconditional ceasefire. But Moscow is blatantly ignoring this demand. In this war, as stated by the head of European diplomacy, Kaja Kallas, there is one aggressor and one victim, and it is Russia that must be forced to make concessions. At the same time, statements by Putin and his propagandists about supposed successes on the battlefield should not mislead the international community.
The idea that Ukraine is losing is completely false. If Russia were able to conquer Ukraine by military means, it would have already done so. Putin cannot achieve his goals on the battlefield, so he will try to do so through negotiations. To ensure the best outcome for Ukraine and Europe, we must continue on this path, but pick up the pace. This means strengthening sanctions that will deprive Russia of resources for waging war, as well as increasing military and financial support for Ukraine.
German Chancellor Friedrich Merz is convinced that after any peace agreement with Russia, Ukraine will still need a strong army and clear security guarantees. It is unacceptable to limit the size of the armed forces of Ukraine's main security guarantor. Merz also emphasized that the current front line should be the starting point for any negotiations.
Europeans and Americans share enormous responsibility in this conflict. Ukraine needs strong armed forces. If a peace agreement is ever reached, which we are also working on together at the European level, Ukraine will still need strong armed forces and reliable security guarantees from its partners. Any agreement involving the European Union, European states as a whole, or NATO also requires the approval of European partners or consensus within the alliance.
Lithuanian Foreign Minister Kęstutis Budrys warns that any attempt by Russia to change Ukraine's borders, even minimally, could set a dangerous precedent. In the future, the aggressor might also lay claims to the territories of NATO countries. At the same time, Europe has effective levers of pressure on Putin. Frozen Russian assets, the prospect of Ukraine joining the EU, and the creation of a special tribunal to investigate crimes committed by the Russian Federation.
If we allow the borders to be redrawn in any way, even in the slightest form, they'll come to us with a marker and a map, and then with tanks to change them somewhere else. We cannot allow any de jure or de facto legitimization of the occupied territories. Kęstutis Budrys, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Lithuania, in an interview with Delsai.
NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte is also convinced that Moscow will not stop threatening Europe's security, even if it signs a peace agreement. He suggested that the war in Ukraine could end by the end of the year, but Russia would still remain a significant source of instability. Rutte called the peace plan, which emerged after broader diplomatic talks in Geneva, a good basis for future discussions, but added that Putin should not dictate to Kyiv which allies to choose or which alliances to join.
Russia has neither a say nor a veto over who can be a member of NATO. Only the Washington Treaty is the fundamental document. It is this document that allows any country in the Euro-Atlantic region to join the alliance. Mark Rutte, Secretary General of NATO, in an interview with R&D.
While discussing the peace plan for Ukraine, European leaders are also thinking about how to protect themselves from hybrid attacks by Russia. Unknown drones in the airspace of European countries, GPS jamming, sabotage in the Baltic Sea, provocations at military bases and on transport routes. Moscow regularly tests NATO's resilience and assesses its response. In just the last 3 months, there have been 110 acts of sabotage in EU countries.
Russian drones and agents are striking NATO countries, and now Europe is doing things that just a few years ago would have seemed impossible. It is planning a counterstrike. According to 2 senior officials from European governments and 3 EU diplomats, the ideas range from joint offensive cyber operations against Russia to sudden NATO-led military exercises. From a Politico publication,
even now, European countries are strengthening their armed forces in preparation for a possible threat. For example, Germany plans to create 6 new units equipped with strike drones. Poland has increased its military spending to a record high and plans to allocate 4.7% of its GDP to defense. And in France, they have introduced a voluntary military service program for young people aged 18 to 19.
In this unstable world, where might prevails over law, war is a reality today. Our country can't afford fear, panic, unpreparedness, or disunity. Fear never prevents danger. The only way to avoid it is to be prepared for it.
The European Union acknowledges that the peace plan proposed by Donald Trump's administration could be a step toward ending Russia's war against Ukraine. But it should not turn into a surrender of Kyiv's interest. Any concessions only encourage the aggressor. That is why Brussels is relying on a combination of diplomacy, sanctions pressure on the Kremlin, and reliable security guarantees for Ukraine.
Subscribe to The Gaze and stay updated on the most important events, top news from Ukraine and all over the world, in-depth analysis, exclusive reports and interviews, all on hand in our channel. Join our community of viewers and stay tuned.